You can't fix what you can't see. Years ago in business, we had an advantage. Everyone had on their desk an inbox and outbox, and they performed their work on a desktop. That's why we call it a desktop computer. Your manager put work into your inbox. You completed that work on your desktop. You placed it into your outbox, and your manager came and moved that through the sequence of the business. That's why in the 1990s, there was a huge explosion of a concept called management by wandering around. In Japan, they called it the Gemba walk. Walk around and look at the inputs and outputs of each of your people, and that will very quickly tell you where the bottlenecks are, where you're having challenges, where you need assistance, and what's going to happen next week, next month, next year, based upon the volume coming through that system. Y'all can't do that anymore. We can't see the work anymore, and it makes it very, very difficult for us to move forward. We really operate blind, not truly understanding how the work flows. We feel around in it. We sort of hope that meetings are helping us, or maybe a KPI can help us understand what's actually happening, but we really don't have the visibility we need. That means that when we get into doing things like deploying software or trying to make changes to systems, we continually run into challenges. If you're into the software design business and you get to that UAT testing, you know what's going to happen. You're going to find out that there were things that the users need that weren't built inside of that system. And then it's going to cause missed deadlines and rework and concessions and escalations and lost trust. And this happens just as much with a roofing company as it happens with a software company. We don't see the system. We don't understand the system. And when problems arise inside of it, we're sort of blind to them. And we have to operate in this very heroic effort, right? Where we're constantly rewarding the heroes of our business for saving us. But the bonuses that we give to those heroes are nothing more than reparations for management not really understanding how the system works. So I want to show you some methods today on how to resolve that problem, particularly when it comes to discovery, when you're trying to work with organizations and understand what's happening. If you're a leader, maybe you're an implementer for software, maybe you're a consultant, the methods I'm going to show you today will radically transform your ability to see the work and allow you to go back to that where you had before, where you could see how things were working and you could manage those bottlenecks. For 50,000 years out in the savannas of Africa, every time that we came across a saber-toothed tiger, it was going to be a rough day. Grandma had told you to stay away from saber-toothed tigers, your mom and your dad and your uncles. Every instance with a saber-toothed tiger was catastrophic to you and your tribe because the slowest runner among you got to go home with the saber-toothed tiger and the rest of you went back to the cave. That's till one evening when someone reached into the fire and took a piece of charcoal and walked up to the wall and drew a picture of a tiger. Now, I want you to imagine that moment for just a second, the light from the fire gleaming against the wall of the cave and people looking up and seeing a tiger on that wall. Now, that's the first moment in human history where someone looked at a tiger and wasn't terrified. Their limbic response of fight, flight, fear, and fawn didn't reactivate the way that they usually do. And that had to be a shock in that moment of like, wait, I can look at a tiger and not be afraid. They had never had that instance before. And very quickly, someone else could pick up the charcoal and say, well, what if? What if we had our clubs? What if we had our spears? What if we laid in ambush? Could we take this tiger out and change our world? And that is the beginning of reasoning. It's the beginning of abstraction. It's what separates man from animals in the archaeological record. Our ability to draw on walls and to communicate with each other. Interestingly enough, the archaeological record shows that we were drawing on walls in this way before we started using human language. Before we had the complexity of sentence structure, we were grunting, we were doing those kind of things, but not in the way that you would expect it to be language. So we were able to coordinate our efforts just with charcoal and a wall of the cave. And that tells us something about the way that our brains work. If you've ever been around a child or seen a child, or maybe you've been a child yourself, you know what happens if you take a 12-month-old baby and you place it into the dirt or into a sandbox and you give it a stick. What will it do? It'll put the stick in its mouth, of course, is the first thing. But the next thing is it'll begin to draw circles and lines on the ground. If you've ever been around children, you know how this works. You put them at the counter, you give them a piece of paper, a crayon. They don't even know how to talk or understand our words yet, but yet we all follow this same exact pattern. All 8 billion babies and former babies, you included, operated in this exact same way. What psychologists have found over the years is that this is not just scribbling. This is the human brain developing and reenacting what happened in that cave that night. It's connecting the dots between objects, it's abstracting, it's strategizing, it's understanding the relationship between Uncle John and Aunt Karen. It's recognizing that grandma and grandpap both live in the same house and they have a dog. Psychologists have found that these circles are not just nothing. They are representations of the world, allowing children to connect the dots and understand how the world works. This is called advanced human reasoning. It's using this prefrontal cortex. It's not responding to the things that are happening on a daily basis. It's truly thinking things through. It's fast forward, it's pause, it's rewind. It's all of the things that we can do when we're abstracting and strategizing up against a wall together. Now, if you've ever watched any detective show, I guarantee you know what I'm looking at right here. This is how it always ends up. We put everything on the wall, we get the string, at least in the older shows. The new NCIS and those kind of things have digital things, but we connect the dots and then we step back and we go, oh, geez, of course it's Susan. Go arrest her right now. This is how human brains work. It's how they evolved to work. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something called process triage and an offshoot of that called the fix. These are both methods that play into the biological evolutionary design of human beings, and it allows them to communicate in a way that is very foreign but very familiar. Once people get started communicating this way, they don't want to stop because it's very, very effective in allowing them to pull information from the team and find out what's actually going on. Now, this method was originally created by a gentleman named Rosie Rosenberger. This man was 35 years in the U.S. Army Ranger captain in the U.S. Army. So this is a serious guy. And in the early 1990s, he got a job at one of the biggest telecommunication companies in America. Not the biggest, but a competitor that was up and coming. And he was assigned a task by the CEO of that organization. And that was, with tens of thousands of employees, who's really doing what? And is it effective? And Rosie developed a model where he believed, just as I do, that you cannot fix what you cannot see. So he brought people from the field in. Like, think about, this is really before cell phones. Look, he has a pager on his belt. And ladies, look, you had to have shoulder pads to go to work back in the 1990s. But Rosie developed this model using notes on a board, using a wall and covering it with the things that people do and asking them to move those things around and find patterns. And he found incredible success inside that organization. And eventually dozens of people inside that organization began using this method in over 1,000 workshops to identify bottlenecks and pain and struggles. It's really a fascinating system, as you'll see. And the first workshop, this one right here on the wall, you'll notice in some places there's minutes written down over here, 5 minutes and 7 minutes and 12 minutes and all these kind of things. What Rosie discovered in that first workshop was that the team that was in the room building the map were talking about a process that was currently taking them 32 days. And when they went through and they figured out how many minutes each item actually took, not the bureaucracy, not the approvals, not the loops, not all of these kind of things, that entire team over the course of 32 days performed only 92 minutes of actual value adding work. The rest was checking on things, looking for things, waiting for things, signing off, meetings and approvals. And he realized in that moment, as did the leadership at that organization, that they needed to fundamentally look at the workflow and understand how it operated and actively work to reduce the amount of time it took for things to get done. These workshops have now been done all over the world with teams of all sizes. We've been performing these ourselves. Rosie and his team performed them for the last 3 decades. And it is an incredible way to perform discovery, to find out what actually is going on in a system and discover the pain, particularly before you roll out any sort of software in it. This is a great method of communication to bring people together to truly understand how the work gets done. It's called process triage. And we've been doing this now ourselves since 2023. I've been doing this work since early 2000s, but we merged with Rosie's work in 2023. We've launched recently something called The Fix. It's an online version of that stand against the wall workshop together. We understand the world's changed and it's much more difficult to get people in a room. There is a huge value to having them all in the same room at the same time. But if we can't do that, we do something called The Fix. It's a process game planning workshop. It's fun. We have a good time with it. We bring people into a virtual environment and we work with them there to ask them to post their steps, to vote on certain things, to define their pain points, to make impact statements about that pain of what is it doing and what is it causing, to talk about the implications of that pain and the if-then statements of what would change in this organization if we could resolve those things. Now, when we talk about pain, we're very specific, but let me show you this first. This is a live workshop in about a minute and a half. This is the whole entire thing. Right here, they're selecting the most painful processes in the entire organization. 80 people in here voting, telling us where the pain is, and then we take them over and we have them build the process map together. Each individual on their computer, we're giving them instructions on what we want them to build. They build it out, then we help them formulate that and put that into a process flow as you're seeing here. As they're building this out, we're working with them. We're giving them the opportunities to voice their opinions, to throw trump cards up here and explain that they don't believe that's how it works. Then we teach them about pain. Pain is not a resource or a person. It's something wrong with the system. We ask them to write down those pain points with percentages, not about blaming people, and bringing those together. And then we do root cause analysis with them to try to identify what is the root cause of that problem. Do we need to analyze, design, train, or enforce is our next step. And then finally, we capture all sorts of information from that in that workshop about their sentiment. What do they believe about the process? Are they using we words or I words? These things are all really helpful. When we do it live, it is amazing. It always starts out like this with a few bubbles, and then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And in the end, people get clarity, they get understanding, they understand how things work. This in particular is an incredible method. About 60% of the maps that we built last month were ERP implementations. So we do a lot around software and a lot around integrating systems together. If there's a merger and acquisition and they have 2 different systems or 5 different systems, how do we bring people together into a room to map out the actual happy path of the workflow, and then which of those systems best aligns with that workflow? We allow those people to put their names on that map because then they also obtain ownership in that work, which is critically important. At the end, we build out a map for you. Here's a PO process for somebody implementing NetSuite. They've never done POs before, and we needed to build these maps ahead of time so that we could give them to the implementer, so that the implementer did not make any assumptions about what we needed built. Because what we needed built is this, not the standard off the shelf, what they expected. This is too large of an organization, and we know what happens when things aren't properly scoped on the front end. In this instance, we didn't have any managers in the room. These are the frontline employees that are mapping out how they believe that structure should work. And the CFO is coming in over top of that and saying, yes, here's this gateway. Here's this gateway. We need to write a policy. We need a procedure here. We've got to analyze why this keeps happening over here. This is giving you an incredible dimension into the work and into what needs to be fixed. Here's another example. This is another, this is an ERP. I believe this is also a NetSuite implementation where we did booking to cash. Let's understand this whole entire flow. Let's present that back to the implementer. Let's have the implementer look at it and say, you know what, this is not what we anticipated building. We're going to need to make a change right now. We're going to have to change the timeline. We need to get more resources. We're going to have to do a plugin, whatever that might be. We also have prompts that would allow us to take the information that we collect, not just the map on the wall, but the pain, the comments of people and the things that they said, and turn those prompts into a 30, 60, 90-day plan, as well as a sentiment analysis plan, something that actually tells you what's the sentiment and where will there be resistance for change in the organization and where change can be led because people are excited about it. We'll give you these prompts and create this for you if you'd like, that allows you to really understand what needs to happen after that workshop. From those triage results, from that pain, we turn all of those pain into actionable items, things that a consulting firm might come and do work for you for, things that you can assign as a rock or a to-do to somebody inside your company. And we teach you a method of thinking about how to resolve problems. Problems are systems problems. They're not people or resources. Yes, there are times they are people and resources, but for the most part, we want to blame the system, because when we blame people and resources, they get defensive. Right? They all try to hoard things, or they try to hold their cards close to their vest. We don't want that. We want them to believe that the system is the problem, and that it's our job as management to analyze the root cause of problems in that system and design better solutions that will make the work easier to do. Now, as we move through it, many times we'll have an organization that says, we need to do this. We know we need to do it, but we don't know where to start. We can help with that as well. We use a method that I created called System of the System that allows you to identify the core revenue flow and opportunity flow through the business, the supporting flows as they cascade down, and then identify all of the processes that happen inside of there as collected by employees. Then we do voting. We give everybody a series of votes. Usually it's about 5, and we ask them to place those dots wherever in that stream they feel restricted. And it is amazing. You see very quickly where the bottlenecks, where the slowness are, where things are standing in the way of people getting the best possible work done. Again, I want to remind you of this. Pain is not a resource or a person. It is a system problem. Now, if you've been trained in Lean or Six Sigma, all of this next part to you, you're like, well, yeah, of course, everybody knows this. You'd be surprised. I did 107 talks and workshops last year for CEOs, and I got to tell you, maybe 4 or 5 of them had ever heard this before. It's called the 94-6 principle. You can Google it. It's very commonly known in engineering and in design and manufacturing, and it's also been layered into accounting teams and call centers. The 94-6 rule. It came from 2 guys, one guy named Stewart and another guy named Deming, who in the 1930s worked together at Bell Telephone and created one of the greatest accomplishments in American history. They created something called the process control chart, the ability for people to measure their system and their process every day, and then to turn that over with written conditions to tell management what's happening that causes things to improve and what's happening that causes things to degrade. And then management's responsibility was to go out and focus on those things. So I want to tell you a little story about that. At Bell Laboratories, Deming is a physicist, Stewart is a mathematician, and they join forces taking their ideas to bring them out to the front line of the business. Now, if you know much about American history, you know the mass manufacturing of the Ford Motor Company revolutionized the way that we did things around the world. But unfortunately, Ford's biggest problem was the same one that we still repeat to this day. What does Ford stand for? Fixer, repair daily, found on road dead. All of those monikers came about because Ford products were notoriously bad in quality. They could make them very quickly, but they couldn't do them at a very high quality. And that was going to be a problem, particularly as the century moved on. So Stewart has his ideas about statistics and mathematics inside of a business, and he's tracking things out on these little grids. But W. Edwards Deming is this physicist, and he understands what's happening, spooky action at a distance in the quantum world. And he understands one of the biggest challenges with getting good measurement in physics is this, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And what that says is that in order to increase certainty, you must decrease variation. If you want certainty in your numbers, the only way to do that is to find the outliers and eliminate them. Find what's causing things to go up and down and do more of the up and less of the down. This is why this guy, if you know who he is, Walter White, he calls himself Heisenberg in Breaking Bad, because sometimes you got to get rid of some variation if it steps out of line if you're in the drug business. This concept that was birthed in the late 1930s at Western Electric and Bell Telephone turned into something called systems thinking, and it birthed what was called the 5 Nines movement. Organizations began to understand that management could control what they believed was 99.999% of faults and failures inside business. That eventually turns into Six Sigma, into Lean, into all of these methods that we use for engineering today. This was the birth of that way back then in the 1930s. And it came about because we started blaming the system and stopped blaming the people. We empowered the people that were doing the work to tell us what was wrong with the system. And that is what we do in these workshops, because whatever the problem is, the system is the problem. You've all probably experienced this. Maybe you do ERP implementations. Maybe you're a consultant. Maybe you're a CEO. You try to do some work, you push it out, and that just doesn't ever really work in the right way that you think. And that's because we think so much about events that are occurring, what's happening with our customer, how are our people behaving. We're constantly in this battle between events and behaviors, and we never really focus on the structure, the architecture of our business to produce the results that we want to do. Now, if you're a gardener, you know that you don't just buy green bean seeds and throw them out your back door and pray for a harvest. No, you've got to row the hose. You've got to set up trellises and irrigation. You have to look for pests. Sometimes you have to prune and thin things out. Sometimes you have to help those vines wrap around that trellis. Getting better seeds isn't going to solve that problem. It's a little bit different. It's about the system being the problem. Remember, 94% of problems statistically that W. Edwards Deming and Stewart discovered were system problems. That doesn't mean that people don't make mistakes. It just means that fundamentally at its core, we could have done a better job architecting that system. So we want a way to help find those problems before we deploy new systems, before we merge things together, before we make reductions, before we decide on new directions. We need to have a map that helps us navigate through and truly understands what the work means. This is process triage and the fix. Process triage is done in in-person workshops, usually over a day or 2 days. And the fix is done in shorter segments where we break it up. 2 hours in an in-person or in an online session with your team, then another hour to clean up that map, and then a final hour for management to really dissect what was discovered during that time. We then give you a 30, 60, 90-day plan so you can walk out of the back end of it and know the things that you have to take care of that month and the next month and the next. And then someone follows up with you at that 30, 60, 90 and finds out how you're doing and sees if you need any additional assistance. This is process triage and the fix. It's available for companies. They can hire us to do these. There's consultants that we have in our network that do them for you, but we also license to a lot of consulting firms, larger consulting firms. If you're a larger business and you work with a big name consulting firm, just ask for the process triage and the fix. They probably already are licensing it or in the process of licensing it, and just ask them how to incorporate that into your engagement. If you're getting ready to deploy an ERP, I can send you to multiple CTOs that would tell you, don't ever, ever hire somebody to do an ERP unless they first process mapped it out, because you'll run into trouble along the way because you won't build what actually needs to be built. Hey, I'm Derrick Maines, the Process Fixer. If you'd like to find out more about this, you can check us out at thesystemistheproblem.com or talk to your consultant, a consultant that you have in your market that knows this method and can come out and practice it.